Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Okay. Got a really good question for today's Q&A. I've been going back and forth with Adam on askbillhartman@gmail.com in regard to some questions that he had about his 13-year-old son, who I believe is a baseball player, since Adam heard me talking with Eric Cressy on Eric's baseball podcast. And so Adam had questions about things like key performance indicators and assessments for his 13-year-old son. And so one of the things that I thought would be interesting to clarify would be how we manage these younger athletes compared to the more mature, because the conversation I was having with Eric was about a more mature athlete and how we would handle those situations. And I don't think that parents have been given a reasonable playbook as to how best to manage some of these young athletes, because I think there are better ways to handle this, especially with the growing concern over these adult type injuries that we're seeing in young kids. I could go another lifetime without seeing a 14-year-old kid with a Tommy John surgery. What I did this morning is I reposted a blog from 2014 that talks about this very specific topic of long-term athletic development. So there's some opinions in there and a little bit of structure to give you an idea. But let's review things a little bit. Early on, when we talk about really young kids, we're talking about 6, 7, 8 years old, where they start to get exposed to some organized sports. Most of the training, if you will, would be free play. We want them to be exposed to a broad number of physical activities, a lot of physical problems to solve, and just expose them to a lot of movement and let them figure a lot of this stuff out all by themselves. So we don't need to structure games. They need to be creative. And like I said, get them exposed to as many things as possible. This makes for a really, really smart child, first and foremost. And then, like I said, it exposes them to a number of different movement strategies that they will use later on in their development. If we had any structure to this, I would recommend that you expose your child to martial arts and gymnastics. And when I say this, I'm talking about the non-competitive kind, if you will, because the idea is not to develop the competitive, overuse, extensive type of training. We just want to expose them to a lot of different styles of movement. As they get into this preteen, early teen stage, this is where we can actually start to expose them to a structured training program, but this is a learning to train situation. So this is not about setting personal records in weight lifts or worrying about top speed or anything like that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to expose these kids to a structured training program. So again, they learn to train, because in 3 to 5 years later, when they do get to this age of specialization, when they do have a more adult physiology and they're more adaptable to that type of training, now they're going to be ready for it. So we don't need to reteach them how to train. And so that's what this middle range is for. We want to make sure that you're still exposing them to any number of sports and activities. So limiting the number of exposures is probably a bad idea, because when they are faced with something novel, that movement that they may be exposed to that they are unfamiliar with, because they don't have good problem-solving skills in regards to movement, can be seen as threatening, and it actually ultimately limits their level of performance. So again, if you think about some of the best athletes in the world, many of them were exposed to any number of sports early on in their careers. So that's something to keep in mind. Formal assessments at this point are of minimal use. It doesn't mean that we never use them. It just means that they're not very valuable, because when we think about the physiological development of kids, if I would assess you at age 13 and I would come back and assess you at age 18, you're a totally different human at that point. So that 13-year-old assessment really didn't give me much information. So what we do is we're going to use a lot of observation in regards to just typical sports performance, or as we're exposing you to the training process and you're learning that process, those will be our assessments. So we're actually going to use the movements themselves as assessments. So in the later teen years, when after puberty, we've got a much more adult-like physiology that's more adaptable, then what we're going to be looking at is training with the intention of raising performance. So the tolerance is there. So the one thing that we want to consider about little kids is that they have this broad adaptability, but they have a very low tolerance. And so what we want to make sure is we're limiting the specific exposures, and we want to make sure that stays broad scope through those early years, so they're ready, like I said, for the specificity of the later teen years. So Adam, I truly appreciate you asking questions about this, and I'm really glad we had the back and forth. I hope this sort of leads you in a direction, but I would say go to the blog today, read through that blog on long-term athletic development for a little bit more specific ideas and concepts. If you have any more questions, please send them to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and coaches and Coffee and Coaches conference call tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. every Thursday. Tomorrow's Chips and Salsa Day too, so that's exciting. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.